最後まで諦めないこと。じっくりいきましょう。私は味わいたいのよ。
300 gems for wisdom cube. 500.
今回のチャンピオンです。
私とお前は対等ではない。覚えておけ。
チンチョン。40 fuck. Damn. If I'm gonna make it.
心配するな。見つけてやるぞ。あそこにおるよ。面白そうだ。
300. Then now at least 30. Mas okay. Battle pass na. Pero $10.
ドンパチはいきなり始まるから覚悟しときな。
リング外で死にたくなけりゃ俺のスピードについてきな。これじゃ足りねえ。まだまだ上げるぞ。
残り45秒。リングは遠いわ。
MEU. Ah, that's my gun. 1911 MEU. Someone was here. Doors open.
タイムアップなのにリングの外にいる。急いで。閉じたドアを発見。追加のアイテムを発見。誰かがここにいた。警戒して。ケアパッケージ。
ケアパッケージだ。いいね。
交戦中。
おい、材料が手に入ったぞ。
Gago.
敵 敵をダウンさせた。
俺を撃ってるのか。
リロード中よ。
シールドをチャージ中。
リロード中よ。シールドをリチャージ中。
The hell?
あそこまで入ってくるぜ。
敵のシールドを割った。リロード中よ。撃たれてる。リロード中。敵を倒した。敵のシールドを割った。挨拶してきな。何がもう痛いわね。ダウンさせられたわ。
Patay ka dun? Ano yan? Pa yan? Naloko na yan. My god. God damn it. Puro kamalasan yun na nangyari sa akin. 400 2,000 gems. Huh? Just, man, I don't wanna whale this game. I don't have money to begin with. Sheesh. Okay. Fucking commission's not giving me wisdom cubes, man. It's fucking annoying. So how far is the next wisdom cube rewards? Level... Oh my god, it's very far. 65. Sheesh. Damn it. We're so close on finishing the pity pieces. I got 14 left.
次の試合はサルボのファンに捧げるぜ。
Says 28. Sheesh.
甘く見ないで。私は戦いに来た。あなたの選択が結末を変える。
So I could potentially get
今回のチャンピオンです。
5,
俺は興奮を求めて戦ってる。応援がつくのはボーナスだ。
10. Just 10? Huh. 10 wisdom cubes, huh? Okay. That worked.
降下する。こらえて。
Automatically unlock ba yung ano? Or edi ma-unlock ko lang yung amount? Yun lang yung ma-amount ko. Na ma-unlock ko ba pag na ano? Na-reach ko yung level eh. 500 pesos. Walang pera. Pag ka lang. Can use a problem this game and a sentinel.
助かる。全員リングの中だ。ナイス。
Bring me a sentinel, please. Thank you.
ポップアップを発見。キネティックフィーダー。
Man. Akala ko Octane yung kasama namin. Fuse pala. Akala ko tao.
Scope を発見。近距離用よ。新しいキルリーダーよ。
Tao mo dyan.
よし、リングの中で。
Let's watch some videos while we're playing.
At 8:07 on the morning of January 13th, 2018, Hawaii residents were woken up by the following sound, along with this message. Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill.
アクサを投げる
Similar alerts interrupted TV and radio stations, leading many to find to the side of the road and even call to say goodbye to loved ones. For the next 38 minutes, 1.4 million people contemplated, for the first time with any gravity, the hopeless inescapability of nuclear missiles. Half an ocean simply have nowhere to hide.
敵がダウン
But the truth is, neither do any of us. Ronald Reagan made this same solemn discovery over 40 years ago when he visited the Cheyenne Mountain Nuclear Plant in Colorado Springs.
敵の
Part of the United States Space Force, the youngest in the country's 6
Ako muna.
branches of armed forces.
Fine, siya muna.
But back then it was run by NORAD, which you might recognize from its annual tradition of tracking Santa's sleigh. NORAD was and is a real organization, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, and it was set up to monitor attacks from the skies. If the Soviets had ever sent a missile hurling towards San Francisco, it was NORAD stationed here at Cheyenne Mountain that would see it coming and alert the president. All this amazed Reagan, who, behind a reinforced steel door, listened to briefings on how the system worked. Its giant computer screens and Hollywood reminiscent flashing maps gave visitors a distinct feeling of reassurance. Here, science fiction was reality. But then Reagan asked the commander a simple question. What could they actually do besides simply retaliate after the Soviets fired a missile? The answer deeply disturbed him. Nothing. When NORAD was created in the 50s, it was designed to help intercept bombers. But by the time of Reagan's visit, the primary threat had shifted to missiles, leaving NORAD the task of merely watching as residents of Hawaii thought they were the end of the world.
新しいキルリーダー注意しない
Few
とね
Americans are aware how true that fact remains today, 40 years later in 2022. While the enemy has changed more than once since Reagan's time, the basic fact has not. The United States still does not have an effective defense against incoming missiles. Read between the lines, and not even the Department of Defense claims to have any protection besides the threat of retaliation against the likes of Russia or China. But what no politician or Pentagon official will dare say out loud is that we aren't even defended from a much lesser threat like North Korea or Iran. In all technical likelihood, Kim Jong-un could flatten any American city of his choice at any time. While the Hawaii missile alert was sent by human error, the truth is that had North Korea launched a mere fraction of its nuclear stockpile, it's all but guaranteed that at least one would reach its target.
Yep.
It could happen by accident, by breach of protocol, through a misunderstanding, by an irrational actor, or, in theory, a terrorist plot. But even fewer Americans are aware of how many billions we've spent trying to change this, with very little success. Military is no stranger to wasteful white elephants or bloated budgets, to say the least. Yet the scale of our missile defense efforts would surprise even the most hardened critic of the military-industrial complex. It's one of the most expensive defense projects ever undertaken, though it's produced far less than almost anyone is aware of, and certainly less than most who are will admit. Sponsored by Brilliant. Learn math, science, and computer science the intuitive way with the link in the description. If America was attacked from afar, it would be with a strategic ballistic missile. Strategic as opposed to tactical because it would be launched from a distance. Ballistic rather than cruise because it would strike a fixed predetermined target, like a city or military base. Its trajectory
squad?
Finally, as the
Malas
powerful
naman.
force of gravity pulls it back down to Earth, it enters the very short terminal phase. Now, all else being equal, if you were trying to shoot down this incoming missile, you'd want to do it as early as possible. Not only does it travel slowest during the boost phase,
Doon
but
ko
the
pala.
burning rocket makes it easiest to spot. Plus, if worst comes to worst and your first
Shiro.
attempt fails, you might have enough time to try again. Realistically, however, intercepting a ballistic missile during its boost phase is usually just plain impossible. Take, for example, North Korea. If a Hwasong-15 missile were launched at Boston, this is roughly the path it would take. According to the American Physical Society, it would have to be intercepted within the first 260 seconds, which would place it about here.
ちょっと待って
For our defending missile to get there in time, it would have to be launched from somewhere inside this circle. In other words, we would have to permanently station missiles above or within either North Korean, Chinese, or Russian territory. So should the actual collision occur above one of those three countries?
リロード中よ
Sure, it could be intercepted earlier, allowing our missiles to be launched from
Oh
anywhere
my.
here, but that would leave mere seconds for the incoming missile to be detected, for the president to be informed, and for a decision to be made about whether and how to respond. If North Korea were kind enough to attack further south, say Hawaii or San Francisco, American launchers could theoretically be stationed in South Korea, Japan, or international waters. But that would leave them well
Oh my,
ready
di pa
to
namatay.
quick preemptive attack. We do, on the other hand, have examples of successful mid-course terminal phase intercepts.
Cute.
Israel's Iron Dome has demonstrated roughly 90% real-world effectiveness, and Iraqi Scud missiles were shot down during the Gulf War. We're pretty good at intercepting short, medium, and intermediate range missiles, under about 2,500 kilometers or 1,500 miles.
シールドリーチャージ
Most
して
of
る
the American military bases and several of our allies like South Korea and Australia neighbors, sometimes even by overlapping defenses. Though even they aren't perfect. The Iron Dome's 90% hit record is only for the 50% it chooses to engage.
Oh my
And the
god.
Patriot
Oh,
missiles used in the Gulf War were
Namakadaw ng
discovered to be
kalaban.
far less effective than was known at the time. But
Yeah.
barring some North Korean takeover of Vancouver or Cancun, America faces no short, medium, or intermediate range threats. Any missile that would hit the United States would be intercontinental, which is a whole different ballgame. These missiles travel up to 100 times further, 7 times faster, and can do 1,000,000 times more damage. Not only that, but they go way up into the upper atmosphere. Intercepting ICBMs traveling at least 15,000 miles an hour requires hitting a bullet with a bullet in space. To really be effective, they even have to strike the right part of the bullet. So, can we do it? Today, the system that claims to protect all 50 states from intercontinental ballistic missiles like those from North Korea is called Ground-Based Mid-Course Defense, GMD. Of its 18 tests conducted between 1999 and 2018, it failed 8, giving it a success rate of just 55%.
死は生き延びるだ
Of those 8 failures, by the way, 6 were for different reasons, ranging from sensor malfunctions to launch failures. Not to mention, the Missile Defense Agency's definition of success is a bit generous. For comparison, our mainly sea-based short-range defense, called
Magkaparty yung
Aegis,
dalawa.
works about 81% of the time. THAAD, the land-based short-range defense we sell to Israel, the UAE, South Korea, and Romania, has a 100% track record. Clearly, intercontinental ballistic missiles, the only kind America is vulnerable to, are just much harder to
ここを探
stop.
索した方がいい
But more telling is how often GMD isn't tested. These are all the tests actually conducted by the Missile Defense Agency across all their missile defense programs, GMD, THAAD, and Aegis, whether they were delayed or happened on schedule. And these are all the times tests have been postponed, merged, or altogether cancelled. Between 2010 and 19, nearly 2/3 of tests fit into this category. The original plan for the ground-based mid-course defense program specifically called for 4 annual tests for 5 consecutive years, but there have only actually been less than 1 on average. Despite repeated failures, testing has in fact slowed down. This does not, obviously, inspire confidence. The usual government response is, hey, if one missile only has a 55% chance of hitting its target, no worries, we'll just send 3 or 4, bringing the probability that at least one does to upwards of 95%. Voila, problem solved. But this is nowhere near as true as it sounds, and for a very specific historical reason. The United States has been trying to intercept ballistic missiles since the 1960s, and George W. Bush entered office already wanting to invest more in the program. But 9/11 changed everything. Suddenly, there was a tremendous sense of urgency. In 2002, Bush announced that the ground-based mid-course defense system, which was then just a prototype with no end to development in sight, would be declared operational in 2004. It didn't matter, in his eyes, that the technology wasn't ready for prime time, because the threat of rogue states like North Korea was simply too pressing. To accomplish this massive feat in a mere 2 years' time, Bush did something entirely unprecedented. Normally, the way just about anything is produced, from toaster ovens to $100 million missiles, is that scientists and engineers first develop the core technology, after which it's all packaged together into one interconnected product, and finally, it's produced at scale. Now, if you really need that toaster ASAP, you might consider cutting some corners. By, for instance, starting to manufacture it while the engineers are still putting on some finishing touches. What a project manager would call a concurrent schedule. But after 9/11, Bush took this hasty approach a step further. Time was of such great importance that he started producing the missiles while the technology was being developed, effectively doing everything at once. As one retired senior military official admitted, quote, "We took a system that was still in development and it was declared to be operational for political reasons." For every other defense project, contractors have to demonstrate their technology before the Pentagon will pay for it. Fly before you buy. But GMD was exempted. What this meant was that when things would inevitably break, engineers would have to go back and disassemble the highly complex missiles and try to retrofit solutions. All of this is to say, each missile is handmade, and many have been deconstructed and redesigned. In other words, there's no way of knowing each one's actual odds of success. 4 missiles might be 4 times more effective than 1, or they may not. We just don't know. What we do know is that independent experts aren't very confident. In 2012, a study by the National Academy of Sciences labeled the system deficient. 10 years later, the American Physical Society not only called its current capabilities low, but said they'll likely continue to be low for at least the next 15 years. America's own Government Accountability Office called its testing, quote, "insufficient to demonstrate that an operationally useful defense capability exists." AKA, it doesn't work. Today, 21 years after 9/11, the program continues to run in emergency mode, with the Missile Defense Agency tasked with both developing the technology and supervising its own performance. Now, you might argue that despite these shortcomings, some defense, even just 55%, is much better than 0. But there are 2 problems with such an argument. First, missile defense is insanely expensive. cost estimates for the GMD system alone vary, depending on who you ask, between $40 and $90 billion, making it more expensive than the Navy's latest Ford-class carrier. That's an entire 1,000-foot-long, nuclear-powered, completely redesigned aircraft carrier. This is the quintessential American prestige project, a 3,000-crew, 100-aircraft floating military base that makes most countries look weak by comparison. And yet, it was cheaper than this one ineffective missile defense system. Add up all the countries' such programs, and the total cost is closer to 350 billion current inflation-adjusted dollars. That's an insane amount of money, even by American military standards. But the second reason is far, far worse. America's real missile defense problem is not actually that it doesn't work, or even that it's stupidly expensive, but something else entirely. Something so big it deserves its own video. Because we've only just scratched the surface of what should be a scandal. We certainly haven't done the science or engineering behind missile defense justice, which is why, in the meantime, you should check out Brilliant's hands-on explanations of orbits, rockets, gravity.
Hey, 42 here. On Thursday the 24th of February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, bringing conflict to Europe on a scale that hadn't been seen since the Second World War. At the time, most, if not all, political commentators believed victory for Russia would be swift and decisive, with the only real question being just how far Putin would go before he was satisfied. The reasoning behind those bold predictions was pretty simple. In the red corner was Russia, one of the largest and most feared military forces on the planet, led by seasoned campaigner and notorious topless horseback rider Vladimir Putin. Whilst in the blue and yellow corner was Ukraine, outgunned in every conceivable department, and led by a former comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky. But as the weeks and months dragged on, it became abundantly clear that victory for Russia was nowhere near. That got me thinking. If one of the world's most powerful countries could be thwarted by a far smaller foe today, what the happened in World War II? Think about it. In only a few months between 1939 and 1940, Nazi Germany somehow conquered half of Europe and a good chunk of North Africa, growing so powerful that it took the combined efforts of Britain, the Soviet Union, the USA, and the whole host of other countries to finally bring them down. When viewed alongside the war in Ukraine, that kind of freewheeling military domination doesn't make any sense. Also consider that Hitler's assault on world freedom came just 20 years after Germany suffered crushing defeat in World War I, and the whole situation is downright baffling. So, how did the Nazis snowball so suddenly, and why was the rest of Europe so utterly powerless to stop Hitler's war machine in its first few years? I'm glad you asked. If we go back to just after the First World War, Germany posed about as much threat to world peace as a damp flannel. Under the Treaty of Versailles, signed by the newly installed Weimar government as part of the German surrender, Germany reduced its military to 100,000 individuals and disbanded its air force altogether. After some vigorous political arm twisting and the odd persuasive nickel cripple thrown in for good measure, Germany also accepted full responsibility for the war and agreed to pay billions of dollars in reparations to the rest of Europe. That was all very good in principle, but in practice, Germany was penniless. And so the Weimar government came up with a genius plan to pay off its mounting debts. It started printing money by the truckload. Yeah, you don't need to have an economics degree to see where this is. All that shiny new money flooded the German economy, triggering mass hyperinflation that, at its worst, saw 4.2 trillion German marks being worth a single US dollar. If you were unfortunate enough to be a German citizen in the early 1920s, you didn't keep the money in place. You didn't
Sa taas pala, second floor.
Literally, people actually did that. By 1924, the German economy was on the floor. Industrial output was at an all-time low, and widespread food shortages left millions in starvation. Just when the fields were fully fallow, help came from the United States. Which Germany had been in war just 6 years before. Under what became known as the Dawes Plan, Germany borrowed huge sums of
Naresponde
money
na yung
from
isa.
American banks to fund the booming cultural and economic recovery in the mid to late 1920s.
Lock mo yung pinto sa likod.
Now, running your country on
Likod.
paper, it
Oh,
might
fuck.
sound a bit
Ikaw, di David lock yun daw sa likod.
the wealthiest, most stable country in the world.
Yes.
What could possibly go wrong? As it happens, that question had a three-word answer. The Great Depression. That little clusterfuck hit the US markets in the summer of 1929, and Germany suddenly found that those lovely American bankers who'd been giving them so much money over the previous 5 years were no longer picking up the phone. So, to sum it all up, by 1930, Germany was basically broke, bereft of allies, and barely the army to battle a beehive. And yet, fewer than 10 years later, they would kick off World War II, having somehow transformed themselves into a world superpower with the most feared army in all of Europe. When you say it like that, such a transformation sounds literally impossible. There simply wasn't enough time. And granted, that's completely true. But it turns out the first seeds of recovery had been planted more than a decade before the Great Depression even began. You see, ever since the Treaty of Versailles, way back in 1919, Germany had been secretly rebuilding its military capabilities. Under the Weimar government, the German police force was quietly given training and equipment of a distinctly military nature. Paramilitary groups were allowed to grow unhindered into what soon became small private armies, and money was discreetly funneled into the research of forbidden military technologies. At the same time, state-sponsored clubs started popping up all over the country. Publicly, they were perfectly innocent. Sports teams, youth programs, aviation clubs, that sort of thing. But privately, they were little more than military training camps in which potential leaders were being picked and future Luftwaffe pilots were primed. An entire generation of Germans was being readied for war behind closed doors. As per the Treaty of Versailles, this was all totally illegal. So these efforts had to be hidden from the international community, and that did impose a kind of natural limit on German rearmament. But the arrival of the Great Depression dealt fiscal death to the Weimar Republic, and it's safe to say that the bloke who took their place didn't overly concern himself with the opinions of Europe. You might have heard of him actually. He went by Adolf, and when he consolidated power in Germany in 1933, he was well and truly tired of the Treaty of Versailles. In fact, he planned to tear that document into neat little squares so he could wipe his arse with it. During the mid to late 1930s, Hitler kicked off the biggest industrial expansion in Germany's history as he tuned the economy in its entirety towards a single end: war. Every man, woman and child with a functional body was put to work for the greater good. Many were funneled into factories producing munitions and vehicles of war. Some furrowed the fields, and others built massive public projects, including the now famous
What orange yung
Autobahn.
Cold Zero? Ano ba?
Hitler paid for all of this with what amounted to little
Ibig
more
sabihin-
than financial smoke and mirrors, involving shell companies and shady promissory notes known as MIFO bills. The whole thing was entirely illegal and hopelessly unsustainable. But Hitler wasn't interested in Germany's long-term financial stability. No. He was going to war, and so long as he won, he'd be able to pay off Germany's mounting debts with all of that loot. In other words, he was turning Germany into the biggest bully in the playground, and he was about to go after the rest of Europe's lunch money. By 1935, Germany's army had tripled to 300,000 men, and its air force, something that's very existence was outlawed, boasted 2,500 cutting-edge warplanes. Now, Hitler wasn't exactly known for his modesty. This is a man who believed his people were part of a master race that deserved to rule over mankind. And so he simply couldn't resist showing off his shiny new army to the rest of the world at what he dubbed the Freedom to Rearm Rally. Publicly admitting to breaking the treaty was a risky move, but Hitler had come up with a nifty little excuse. He claimed to rearm as a pure defensive measure, and that by doing so he wasn't threatening European peace, but actually helping to maintain it. That might sound ridiculous, but what happened next was downright insane. People actually believed it. Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, it's hard to say exactly why that was. Perhaps Europe's other political leaders simply underestimated just how dangerous Germany was becoming under Hitler. Or maybe they were too wary of rocking the boat for fear of plunging the world back into war. But no, Hitler put on a literal fucking military parade to shout about his giant illegal army, and the rest of the world simply rolled over, which only served to make the man with the tiny mustache even bolder. By 1939, on the cusp of the biggest war in history, all those years of fevered preparation had borne lethal and abundant fruit. Hitler's army contained more than 4 million soldiers, and his power was absolute. But that alone doesn't entirely explain why Germany was such a juggernaut in the first 2 years of the war. Hitler may have commanded a stronger army than any of his enemies in a one-to-one comparison, but World War II wasn't a singles match. It wasn't even a tag team. It was a Royal Rumble involving more than 50 countries, and the combined forces of the Allies far outnumbered those of the Axis powers from day one. Well, actually, day two. When Hitler fired the World War II starting pistol by invading Poland, it took Britain and France 2 days to decide that might be a problem and declare war. So, just 54 hours into a war that would last 6 years, the Nazis were vastly outnumbered by the combined forces of the Allies, which also happened to have more money, more resources, more ships and planes, more pastries, more pretty much everything. And yet, we've all read the history books. During the early part of the war, this apparent underdog tore through Europe like a genetically enhanced pit bull. In just 19 months, Hitler successfully invaded Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Yugoslavia, and Greece, with the Allies powerless to stop him. As for how he did it, well, it turns out Hitler had a trick up his well-starched sleeve. Just 21 years separated the end of the First World War and the start of the Second. But during that time, warfare had changed forever. The trouble was, only the Germans had actually noticed. World War I was fought largely in the trenches, with long periods of stalemate as huge forces dug in behind fixed lines. Attacking such heavily defended positions was certainly possible, but it cost the aggressor dearly. However, in World War version 2.0, fortified trenches received a huge nerf. Thanks to advances in tanks, planes, and other newfangled weaponry, trenches had become defenseless. German tactics heavily hinged on these hulking machines, using their speed to surprise enemies with a torrent of tanks and motorized infantry. The objective was to daze the enemy and decimate their defenses. This rapid shitstorm on the ground was simultaneously supported in the skies by newly designed dive bombers that focused their efforts where enemy resistance was strongest, whilst also harassing support lines. You probably know this approach to murdering the enemy as the famous Nazi blitzkrieg, a word that literally translates to lying. But Oddly enough, the term blitzkrieg was never used by Western media.
Tagal mag-deploy ng ano?
Contrary to popular belief, the foundational principles of blitzkrieg, strike
Putang
fast,
ina mo.
strike hard, arms, weren't anything new. The Germans simply combined classic military ideas with modern technology in ways that nobody's ever seen before. The devastating blitzkrieg was the portable radio. Much like tanks, radios were readily used in the First World War. They were large and unreliable, and their physical range made them unviable as shouting
Putang ina talaga.
World War II, radios were much smaller with much better range. And so you don't need to be Sun Tzu to know that effective communication is an incredible asset on the battlefield. And the Germans were quick to adopt the radio as a means to coordinate their devastating blitzkrieg attacks.
Shut up.
Of course, the Allies had access to all these tools too. They just hadn't had the time to figure out how to use them as effectively. At the start of the war, the British didn't have a single dedicated armoured division in their entire army. The Poles were still heavily reliant on cavalry, and whilst the French actually had more tanks than the Nazis, they didn't arrange them in mass ranks like in the German panzer divisions, but sprinkled them here and there amongst the infantry.
Asan yung isa?
Most French tanks also lacked radios,
Naris
meaning
ba?
they simply had no way to match the seamless coordination
may isa
of
pa.
Hitler's ranks. The tactics we now call blitzkrieg were so effective that they allowed the Nazis to defeat their enemies incredibly quickly, and often with minimal losses. France fell to the Nazi war machine in 6 weeks, Poland 35 days, and Denmark in just 6 hours.
Dalawa pa sila.
Sorry, Denmark. Okay, so there's been a lot of background to cover in this video, but if I had to sum it all up in a
Naris pa rin na isa.
it would be something like this. The Nazis were so unbelievably successful in the first 2 years of the Second World
Ano pa to yung ano? Putang inang Bangalore yan.
everyone else. That extra prep time allowed Hitler and his generals to amass a huge, well-equipped army, gain a technological edge over their enemies, and master the nuances of mechanized warfare before anyone else. You have to remember, for years, Hitler knew he was preparing for war, whilst his neighbours were preparing for peace. This crucial head start proved too powerful for Europe to overcome, and if Hitler hadn't begun to believe his own propaganda, namely that his army was all but invincible, the Allies might never have caught up. But, as it transpired, by the middle of the war, Hitler was no longer a schoolboy looking to steal some lunch money. He more resembled a crazy homeless person wandering the streets with piss in his shoes, trying to start fights with absolutely everyone.
今回のチャンピオンです
In the summer of 1941, Hitler ordered the invasion of the Soviet Union as part of Operation Barbarossa. And 6 months later, he declared war on the United States in the aftermath of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Strong though it was, Nazi Germany didn't have the manpower nor the resources to win a truly global war, and yet that's what Hitler ultimately got himself into. It took some time, but eventually the stronger, larger economies of the Allies started to outproduce those of the Axis powers. Allied defeats became the exception rather than the rule. And thanks to the bravery and sacrifice of countless people from many different countries, one of the darkest periods in human history was finally brought to a close. Thanks for watching.
Tapos ganyan. Putang ang patot. Dapat gold to na ako.
材料を手に入れたよ
Bubuo ng putang ina.
Scope を発見スナイパー用よ
残り45秒ですが発見したよかっこいいですレベル2だ 私のものです。
スナイパーアームを見つけた。
敵の姿を確認しました。
残り30秒。リングが閉じる。
材料を手に入れたよ。やったね。
新しいキルリーダーよ。気をつけて。
敵の姿を確認しました。リングまでもうすぐ。残りは10秒。攻撃を食らった。攻撃中。リロード中だ。修理中。
チャージ中。
エアパッケージ交換。僕の大好物だ。
Bruno ng bala yun siya, no? Tagal mo kayo?
シールドリチャージ進行中。
Anong bala? Fuck. Last game. Tangay na.
あそこに敵です。ジップライン射出完了。敵のシールドを粉々にしてあげましたよ。攻撃中です。あそこに敵が見えます。リロードします。敵のシールドを割ったよ。ダウンしちゃった。
シールドをリチャージ中。
敵に攻撃されています。敵のシールドをダウンしました。敵の
Ginagawa nyo?
アークスターを投げた。フラグを投げた。フラグを投げた。テルミットグレネード。シールドを割った。
Baba.
ほら立って。
Baba.
ラインに任せな。
phái là phái là kế phái là
頼まれた。
Baba. Baba. Tagal.
ライフラインにシールドがいる。
Bilis, bilis, bilis.
敵のシールドを割った。リロード中だ。リロード中だ。ハートをどうぞ。
ヘビーアーモが切れた。
シールドリチャージ中。
敵を仕留めた。
はい。精神を。フラグを投げる。フラグを投げる。
Sobrang lang.
交戦中。 気をつけて。グレネードよ。
敵に撃たれてる。敵をダウンさせた。動けない。ダウンした。
味方のバナーを拾ったわ。
Ay, tang ina. Tagal mag ano? Portong gitak ina negative. Nako, napitas kasi yung dalawa eh. Tagal mo ba nung sir kanina? Hindi niyo ba nakita yung ano?
Thailand, with deep cultural history.
The British pound hitting an all-time low today against the dollar. 1 pound equaling about $1.03. It's now back up to like $1.07.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Cold Fusion. Last week, the world witnessed one of the most troubling financial situations in quite some time. The UK's pound, the fourth most traded currency in the world, had declined more than 5% in one day, essentially reaching parity with the US dollar. Imagine losing 5% of your savings overnight. This was the lowest point that the UK currency had ever reached in its history. The crash threatened to blow up almost 50% of the nation's private pension savings, only to be averted just at the last second. So what happened? In this episode, we'll take a look.
愚かさこそが破滅をもたらす
To get the full picture, we must go back a few months. During that time, the United Kingdom started facing a cost of living crisis. Energy prices in Europe were rising due to the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Inflation reached 10% in August, the highest level in 40 years. Amongst this backdrop, the newly elected government, Liz Truss, unveiled two policies that played a key role in the events of last week. The first policy, announced on September 8th, was the energy price guarantee. The aim was for Truss to cap energy expenses for the average family at around £2,500 per year for the next 2 years. Supposedly, this would be a saving of £1,000 per year. The scheme is poised to cost £100 billion during the first year. Without having the budget to sustain such costs, the policy will be financed exclusively by government debt in the form of bond issuance, which you guessed it, is inflationary. The second policy was announced on September 23rd by Asus, the new finance minister. It was supposed to be a historic tax cut plan, both for individuals and companies. The intention was to alleviate pressure and give the economy a boost, ensuring steady growth. This policy was going to be funded by government borrowing, and this was going to cost an additional £45 billion. But despite the noble intention of protecting those who are more impoverished, the policy was heavily criticized. As some research points out, the rich were going to benefit 2 times more than before. The international market looked at this, and it drove them into a panic. The thinking was, all of these schemes are just going to increase inflation, basically causing more problems than they solve. It led to a lack of faith in the UK currency. All of this leads to September 26th and the famous decline in the value of the UK pound.
後ろ
There was a negative response and much skepticism over the effects
俺
of
思うねんけどこのライフラインやばい
on the UK economy.
ちょ死ぬやん
All led investors to sell their great British pound denominated. The result was a large decline in the value of the British pound as it was exchanged for other, quote, safer currency. As the markets turned around, certain financial institutions weren't prepared to handle such a large decline. But the majority of pension funds almost half of the private savings in the country. The problem originated from a niche financial product that investment banks These products involve leverage, which amplifies losses. And this leverage
起きた
Sabog.
on a large part of the value was
逃げて
held
逃げ
in
て逃げ
UK
て
national bonds.
来たわ
May isa pa palang squad.
As asset prices started to decline due to the previously mentioned policy reasons, began to ask
May isa
for more
palang
collateral.
squad.
This forced pension funds to sell some of their assets to meet the obligations.
Ayan, ayaw mag-touch
The market
ID
was
naman
full
itong
of pension
putang na
funds
cellphone na to.
looking to sell their government bonds as they attempted to meet their new collateral requirements. With little demand
Hindi
and a lot
makagold
of
to
supply,
ngayon.
the
Bad
prices
trip naman.
started to nosedive, putting the entire financial system in distress. It was the start of a doom cycle, and if it completely blew up, almost 50% of private savings in the UK would have been decimated.
But a crisis in Britain's pension system is a crisis for the whole financial system.
Pension funds were suddenly faced with the need to raise collateral, money that they needed to pay the companies that they had taken out contracts with on an immediate basis. So they were actually adding to the vicious spiral by selling gilts in the market as well, which then made prices go even lower.
Ang tangke. Sutsuki, Ayana, May.
Very soon after the chaos began, the Central Bank of England was forced to step in. They did so by promising to purchase $65 billion worth of government bonds over 13 days. This essentially put a floor on the prices of UK bonds. As a result, they were able to stabilize the bond market and prevent a doom cycle. This is where supply exceeds demand by so much that the prices go to zero and assets become a liquid. As crazy as this sounds, very possibly the UK economy narrowly avoided crashing in the fashion of a third world nation.
A warning from the IMF, central bank intervention, disorderly currency movement.
You would expect that the combination you just cited to appear in a struggling, developing country with weak institutions.
So, with the help of the Bank of England, the crash seems to be averted for now. As of the production of this video, the British pound has recovered to its previous levels, and the bond market has slowly stabilized. But with that being said, the UK economy isn't
A currency plunge followed by a mortgage spike and now a threat to the very product that sits beneath our economy.
Kakampi mo ako, tanga.
Inflation rages on, and there's still an air of encouraging businesses and individuals to spend more, pushing up demand, adding to inflation. As a result, imports will be more expensive and energy costs will rise. There's also an escalating
Fuck off.
This will in turn make borrowing more difficult for businesses as well as regular people. The mortgage market is familiar with this pain. Since the whole debacle, mortgage lenders have withdrawn 40% of their new and available mortgages from the market, while at least 20 providers have extended their fixed rate mortgages. For the new buyers, this has made purchasing a home virtually impossible, while existing homeowners with fixed rate products remortgaging could double their interest rate, adding more than £2,000 a year to annual expenses.
In the UK, 40% of all mortgage dollars are interest-only arms that will reset in January to around 4%. 40%! Can you imagine how upside down the UK economy is going to be when people have to spend 3 and 4 times more to keep their home?
As for the UK government, they've panicked and already reversed the tax cut policy. Admitting failure after all of this commotion and after just being sworn in is a terrible look for the current administration.
The panicked price spike in the UK bond market has also cooled, so is the worst over? No. Markets are calmed for now by the Bank of England's £65 billion band-aid, and a report that Prime Minister Liz Truss will consult more widely on her bonkers plan to borrow money to cut taxes for the rich. But the market's desperately hoping that the lady is returning. Meanwhile, so much money is flowing out of the London Stock Exchange, the FTSE is again getting close to losing its position as Europe's biggest stock market in France.
So it's not just the UK that's in trouble.
Shotgun nga tayo
There's a lot
para
going
mga
on
ano
in the
tayo.
financial world right now, and I do want to make episodes on a lot of this, but I'll summarize it here. To start, 2 major financial institutions are in trouble, Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank, and their stock prices have recently fallen by 40%. These are international systemic banks with $2.7 trillion in assets between them. These institutions are linked to other critically global financial institutions. So if they give out, many experts say that it might be another 2008 Lehman Brothers event. But at this point, nobody can be sure. It just looks risky. China is also having issues. Their currency has fallen, and the property market is shaky. Zero-COVID policies are reducing economic output and causing pockets of civil unrest.
What are you doing?
Much more. Globally, interest rates are rising, putting strain on the massive amounts of debt held by nations, companies, and individuals.
Follow me.
Investors are getting scared and running into the US dollar for safety, causing it to rise and become a wrecking ball, decimating the relative value of other currencies. And because the US dollar is the reserve currency, pretty much all other countries need it to pay for basically anything. So it's a major problem. If things get bad enough, other central banks may reverse course, just like the Bank of England. They'll lower rates again and print more money. It could stave off a possible depression, but at the sacrifice of all of our currencies. Alright, so that's a lot, so I'll stop cramming in the info here. But to wrap it up, back to the topic of this video, I'd like to hear from those in the UK. What are the conversations like among your friends and family? What does everyone think about very interested to see your comments. If you want to see another video, I've made one on how
Fuck! Wag ako na tumaab.
You might see some things I mentioned happen, already starting to happen. Kind of interesting. Anyway, that's about it for now. Thanks for watching. My name is Dagogo, and you've been watching Cold Fusion, and I'll catch you again soon.
Malas naman.
Cheers.
Okay,